Here is a fact that most people carry without questioning it. Rhinos are dangerous, solitary, aggressive animals. They are part of Africa's Big Five. They charge without warning. They are unpredictable and feared across the continent. And all of that is technically accurate. What is also accurate is that a rhino once stood frozen in apparent terror because a dog barked at it. That a baby rhino has been documented enthusiastically recruiting a wildebeest herd into a game the wildebeest seemed to find tolerable. That a rhino named Mikoli, rescued from a flood as a terrified calf, was fully prepared for release back into the wild, underwent every step of rehabilitation, stood at the jungle's edge on release day, assessed the situation, and walked back to the city. Mikoli now has a regular route through Nepali streets. Locals recognize him individually. He has something resembling a commute. The rhino you have been afraid of and the rhino that refused to leave because civilization seemed more manageable than the jungle are the same animal. That is the first thing this story is about. The second thing is what happened when scientists finally looked at rhinos in the right place at the right time. For decades, black rhinos were categorized as wildly aggressive, antisocial, and deeply territorial. Scientists documented charging behavior, confrontational encounters, and a statistic that should tell you everything about what life as a black rhino involves. 50% of black rhino males die by the horn of another black rhino. 30% of females. By their own kind. This is the most self-directed violence rate of almost any mammal on Earth. And on that data alone, the classification of angry, dangerous, antisocial predisposition seemed reasonable. What scientists did not have was a starlight camera. When researchers equipped with night vision technology finally watched black rhinos in the Kalahari Desert during the hours when the temperature drops to survivable levels, they found something that required them to revise nearly everything they had written. Nearly 20 black rhinos gathering voluntarily at a single watering hole at night. Adults greeting each other in ways that read as familiarity. Calves playing in the dark with excited vocalizations. The animals that charged termite mounds during the day were, after dark, running a social calendar. What had been classified as antisocial was animals conserving energy during lethal heat. What had been classified as aggression was stress behavior under conditions that would produce stress behavior in most large mammals. The scientists were not wrong about what they saw. They were studying at the wrong time of day. Nepal has approximately 20% of the world's Indian one-horned rhinos. 90% of those live in Chitwan National Park. And the residents of the towns bordering Chitwan have developed what can only be described as a working understanding with a 2.5-ton animal that occasionally needs to pass through their streets to find food. The footage of rhinos navigating Nepali roads and pedestrian areas is not edited. It is not from a wildlife park. It is a city where large prehistoric mammals have right-of-way because that is the reality that developed when humans moved into territory that the rhinos had occupied first and both parties reached an unspoken operational agreement. Most of the rhinos doing this are exactly where they chose to be. Mikoli was a young calf when he was pulled from a flood that had separated him from his mother. He likely had additional injuries consistent with a tiger attack. Wildlife rehabilitators worked with him through recovery, trauma stabilization, and a full preparation process designed to return him to the wild. The preparation worked. On the day of release, Mikoli was physically capable of surviving in the jungle. He demonstrated this by turning around at the forest edge and returning to human settlement. When staff tried to relocate him again, he returned. This has continued. Mikoli and rhinos like him are now consistent presences in the streets and surrounding areas of Nepali towns to the degree that local residents have learned to identify specific individuals. What this represents ecologically is complicated. What it represents behaviorally is that a rhino, given the choice between a landscape it understands and a landscape it does not, made a decision. The rhino did not default to the instinctive option. It assessed two environments and selected one. That is not simple stimulus-response animal behavior. That is something closer to preference. The Indian one-horned rhino is also the species with something most people do not know to look for. Where most rhinos rely primarily on their horn for defense, the Indian rhino also has sharp incisor teeth capable of inflicting serious injury. Locals in Chitwan have sustained fractures from rhino encounters. One individual who entered the national park area illegally did not survive the encounter. The same animal that walks past ATMs and shares sidewalks with schoolchildren has tools in addition to its horn, and the casual coexistence that Nepali street life with rhinos represents is real but not unconditional. There are 5 species of rhino currently alive. This number used to be much higher. The rhinoceros family had members that filled ecological roles now occupied by horses, hippos, tapirs, and elephants. One species was the largest land mammal to ever exist. What remains today is 5 species in narrowing geographic ranges at population numbers that require conservation infrastructure to maintain. The white rhino has 2 subspecies. The southern white rhino was reduced to fewer than 50 individuals at its lowest point and has recovered to nearly 20,000 through sustained protection and breeding programs. It is one of conservation's clearest success stories. The northern white rhino has 2 individuals remaining. Their names are Najin and Fatu. The last male, Sudan, died in 2018 at 45 years old. Both surviving females have medical conditions preventing natural pregnancy. The species should be functionally extinct. In 2024, scientists reported the first successful IVF rhino pregnancy using a closely related southern white rhino surrogate. Eggs previously harvested from Najin and Fatu were fertilized with preserved genetic material from northern white males and the resulting embryo was implanted. If this process can be repeated with sufficient success, a population may be possible. This is not guaranteed. It is a narrow path through a situation that should not exist. The black rhino remains at fewer than 7,000 individuals. The Sumatran rhino, the smallest surviving species and the one that most closely resembles the ancient woolly rhinoceros of the Ice Age with its hair and prehistoric proportions, has between 34 and 47 known individuals. A northern Sumatran subspecies is already extinct. A Bornean subspecies has fewer than 5 remaining. The Javan rhino has approximately 50 individuals in a single national park in Indonesia. The western black rhino was declared extinct in 2011. These are not historical facts. These are current population numbers for animals alive right now on a planet where the technology to monitor them, protect them, and in some cases recreate them through genetic science exists simultaneously with the conditions that brought most of them to this point. Baby rhinos are not dangerous in the way adult rhinos are dangerous. What they are is approximately several hundred pounds of social animal with no threat assessment installed yet. They will approach anything. Wildebeest herds. Safari vehicles. Each other. Other species entirely. This changes as they age, but in the juvenile period a rhino calf behaves less like the armored territorial herbivore it will become and more like a large dog that has not been told it is large. They are also deeply bonded to their mothers. A calf stays with its mother for up to 4 years. When wildlife veterinarians need to treat an injured mother rhino, the calf will attempt to intervene on her behalf. The calf does not have the physical capability to succeed, but this does not factor into the decision to try. Wildlife vets have been charged by rhino calves that were not yet large enough to be physically dangerous but were absolutely committed to the attempt. When a rhino calf loses its mother and enters an orphanage, the first night is documented consistently across rescue facilities as among the most difficult experiences the rescue workers describe. The calves are traumatized. Many refuse to eat. Some call out through the night. Some exhibit stress behaviors that cause physical self-injury. The caretakers who work with these calves sleep in the enclosure beside them. They feed them every 3 hours around the clock. They leave clothing that carries their scent when they must be absent. The rhino gets so attached to a specific human that the human's smell becomes a regulation mechanism for the calf's nervous system. Jamie Traynor, who runs a rhino orphanage, has been photographed sleeping with rhino calves on her body. She has run beside them during rehabilitation exercise. She has entered mud pools first to demonstrate that mud is safe when a calf was too anxious to try. In return, she has photographs of herself being used as furniture by an animal that will eventually weigh over a ton. These are not trained animals performing for an audience. These are traumatized animals that attach to the safest consistent presence available and the humans who showed up for them. The bond between orphaned rhinos and their human caretakers is documented extensively. What is less expected is the bond between orphaned rhinos and other species entirely. Daisy the rhino and Maji the zebra, both orphans at the same sanctuary, became inseparable. A rhino that bonded with a goat moved in a way that resembled the goat's gait. There is a cat that adopted a rhino calf and the rhino appears to have accepted the arrangement. And then there is Charlie. Charlie was a hippo found at 2 days old, premature and abandoned by his pod. He was placed with other orphans at a sanctuary that included Mikoli, an orphaned rhino who had been found during a drought and was barely surviving. The two became a bonded pair immediately. What followed was one of the more unusual behavioral shifts researchers at the sanctuary documented. Hippos are typically nocturnal, active at night, resting in water during the day. Charlie started following the rhino schedule instead. Active during the day when the rhinos were active. The problem is that hippos use water to protect their skin from the sun and rhinos do not live in water the same way. Charlie stopped going into water to follow Mikoli, and developed sunburn because of it. The sanctuary had to bring in a second hippo not just for Charlie's companionship but to remind him what species he was actually part of. Even after both Charlie and Mikoli bonded more with their own kind and were eventually released into the wild, they continued checking on each other. They were rehabilitated separately and released separately, and they are unlikely to encounter each other in the wild again. But what they were for each other during the period when both needed something to stay alive for was exactly what the other provided. The rhino's horn is keratin. The same material as a human fingernail. It grows back. The harm caused to obtain it does not grow back. There are people whose entire professional lives are dedicated to protecting animals that most of the world views as simple or dangerous or both. Field rangers in areas like Kruger National Park operate in conditions where poachers are armed and willing to use that weaponry. The rangers are also armed. It is a conflict with a body count on both sides, over keratin. Over the functional equivalent of a very large toenail. The northern white rhino has 2 members remaining. The Sumatran has fewer than 50. The Javan has approximately 50 in one location. The western black rhino has 0. The animal that children learn about, that safari companies build itineraries around, that fills the villagers of Chitwan with a specific kind of casual familiarity, this animal is at numbers where the math does not work without intervention. The science exists. The will is the variable. The rhino that refused to go back to the jungle and now commutes through Nepali streets did not make a complicated decision. It went where it felt safe. It stayed where it felt safe. That is the whole story of every orphan that bonded with a caretaker, every calf that charged a safari truck on behalf of its mother, every black rhino that gathered in the dark at a water hole and was not seen doing it for decades simply because no one had looked. The danger is real. So is everything else.